We want to start with this Dodgers rotation. Man, when you look at just the names in this rotation with no context, it is unbelievable. There are tons of talented guys, a ton of depth in this rotation as well, with huge names, guys who have won Cy Young Awards, some of the filthiest pitchers in the game, some upcoming top prospects, and obviously one of the greatest Japanese pitchers ever. But literally all of them have some pretty significant concerns as well, Taylor. That makes this rotation one of the most fascinating in baseball history, in my opinion. So, Taylor, I'm going to kick it to you, man. Give me your outlook for this 2024 Dodgers rotation.
Yeah, you talked about a lot of concerns. Look at last year's rotation. You know those drug commercials, Matt, where it's like you have the before footage and like it's all the people that are like in black and white and they're like holding their heads and like there's like lightning bolts of pain coming out of them. They're like pulling their hair out like they want to die. That was kind of the rotation for the Dodgers last year, and they still won like 100 games. And now we're moving to the part of the drug ad where color has returned to the lives of the people, and the people that took the medications are off like playing tennis or riding a tandem bicycle or whatever those people do. Because Matt, do you know who led the Dodgers in innings last year with 131?
Who was that?
It was Clayton Kershaw. You love that Kershaw is leading your team in innings. You don't love that number is 131 innings. That was actually the lowest number of innings pitched by a team's leader in innings pitched in the league. So every other team had a guy that threw more than that. And things got so bad for the Dodgers that they had Noah Syndergaard and Lance Lynn start 23 games for them. And those 23 games, they didn't go particularly well for them. And honestly, if it weren't for Bobby Miller, they would have had no stability in this rotation really whatsoever. But similar to what the Rangers rotation is this year, the Dodgers rotation is also going to go through quite a bit of change as the year goes on. We look at opening day, which for them is actually going to be earlier than everybody else because they're playing those games in South Korea. Going into that series, you've got Glasnow and Yamamoto as kind of your 1A and 1B in that rotation. Who cares what order those are in, really? Then as your 3 and 4, you're going to have Bobby Miller, James Paxton, and then the 5 and 6 are going to be a bunch of different guys potentially. Emmitt Sheehan seems to be the guy that's in line to start in that 5 spot right now. Ryan Yarbrough could also be a guy that maybe potentially gets starts or opens or is also just a bulk reliever. And then you also have like Gavin Stone and Michael Grove who could factor into that equation well. And even Landon Knack or Kyle Hurt, those are guys, if they pitch really, really well in the spring, like maybe they get some looks too. So they have a lot of options. There's a lot of depth there. But now let's jump ahead to the All-Star break in July. Hopefully, assuming health, Yamamoto and Glasnow are still your 1A and 1B. And then Walker Buehler is also set to be activated about a month into the season. So he's going to be full steam ahead by the All-Star break. And between Buehler and Bobby Miller, that's kind of your 3 and 4. Again, who cares which one's 3, which one's 4? 2 great pitchers there. And then on paper, you still got James Paxton to slot in as your 5. And all of the young guys I just mentioned, they're all going to be kind of in that 5-6 range as well. And then at that point, there's even the remote chance that Kershaw and Dustin May could be working their way back into the rotation at that point. I'm doubtful about Kershaw, though. I've heard the timetables on the injury that he has are more like a 12 to 15 month recovery time. And for whatever reason, they're saying that it's going to be like a 6-month recovery for him. So I don't really understand how that adds up. I'm not a doctor, so I'm a little more doubtful on that one, but Dustin May should be coming back around that time as well. But then let's jump to the most important part of the year, which is going to be that time around September. And again, assuming everybody stays healthy, you still got Yamamoto, Glasnow as your 1A, 1B, Buehler and Miller as your 3 and 4. And then this is where things get really interesting, because then at this point, you might have Dustin May, James Paxton, Emmitt Sheehan, potentially Kershaw, all vying for like those 5 and 6 depth spots, which is a great place to be. And of course, like you've got to expect that like there's going to be some injuries along the way for these guys as well. But really the way I'm looking at it, and I think the way the Dodgers are looking at it, is if the Dodgers go into the playoffs with any combination of the 4 of Yamamoto, Glasnow, Buehler, Miller, May, and Kershaw, I think they're feeling really good about their chances in the playoffs, because 3 or 4, is what you really need. So what can we expect from these guys, though, over the course of the regular season? Because like you mentioned, Matt, like there's a lot of question marks around a lot of these guys. And I think the first thing you can expect to see from this entire staff is a lot of good sliders and a lot of good fastballs, really including the bullpen too. James Paxton and Ryan Yarbrough are really the only guys they have on the opening day roster that don't throw a slider, at least yet. And pretty much every other arm you're going to see is going to throw a slider that's going to grade out either above average or nasty based on Stuff Plus models. And so, yeah, getting into Yamamoto, I mean, obviously there's been a lot that's been talked about with him, and, you know, there's going to be a learning curve for sure. But I think that learning curve is minimized because he's with the best run organization in baseball, and he has that friend in Ohtani who's already been through all of this exact same stuff and can guide him through that. So I think the learning curve for him is going to be about as minimal as it can be. And ultimately, man, his stuff is ridiculous. Pitching Ninja did a great description of his mix where he was basically like, this is Gosman's fastball, this is a Darvish plus curveball, Alex Cobb splitter, and then he's got Corbin Burns cutter in his back pocket. Like, that gives you a lot of leeway, and that's going to help that learning curve a lot. And on top of that, he has a lot of variations within those pitches, it seems like, as well. The base of all of this is his fastball, which is great. Lots of ride, lots of arm side movement. I think Driveline had some of his World Baseball Classic pitches at like a 137 Stuff Plus, something around there, which is nuts. It sits around 94, but he can get it up to 99. He was also considered to have the best splitter in Japan, which is crazy because everyone there throws either a splitter or a forkball. That's like the national pitch. And, you know, Fangraphs has him projected at around 175 to 180 innings and have his ERA mid threes to low fours. And I think those are fair projections, but I think for all the reasons I just said, based on his stuff, his pitch mix, his 80 grade command, and the fact that he's in the Dodgers organization, my gut's telling me that his 50th percentile outcome is a lot closer to like a 3.3 rather than like that mid threes. But on the risk side, I mean, you know, everything everybody else talks about, like he's coming to a different country. But the thing that I'm dialing in on most is he's going to be up against the highest expectations he's ever been faced with. And I know that he's pitched on the big stage in Japan and on the WBC, but he's going to have to pitch the entire season here while being expected to be the ace for the team that is expected to win the World Series. And that's going to be a heavy, heavy burden to bear, because from a pitching standpoint, I mean, I think he's going to figure it out pretty quick. And then jumping into the rest of these guys, obviously Glasnow, we know the concerns there. It's injury history and workload. He's going to be a 5 and dive guy early in the year for sure, but I think later in the year we're going to see the Dodgers maybe let him take the reins a little bit and go deeper into the games, because ultimately that's what they're going to want in the playoffs. And he's projected to be throwing about 140 to 150 innings, but I feel like that's a little bit high considering he set his career high at innings pitched last year at 120. So for me, I'm going to split the difference there and say about 135 innings, and they have him projected about a 3.53 ERA, which I think is fair. I would lean under there, but I think that's a fair projection for a 50th percentile outcome. But Walker Buehler, kind of mentioned that already. He's not going to be activated until a month in. They've said he's at 170 inning pitch limit. I don't think they're pushing that limit too hard. I think he's going to end up more in that 145 to 150 range. The projections are projecting him to have, you know, around a 4 ERA, which I think is conservative, but I think it's fair. And then Bobby Miller, like we talked about, you know, he was the stabilizing force of the rotation last year. Projections have him with a modest workload increased, going up to about 145 innings, and his ERA hovering kind of on the upper threes, which I think is about right. And then James Paxton is one of the only moves the Dodgers made this offseason that kind of left me scratching my head a little bit when it happened. And they definitely need a lefty. I mean, Yarbrough was kind of their only other option to potentially start that was a lefty. Like it was all righties. Even those younger depth arms that I mentioned earlier, that's all righties. And really, they just need him to hold down a spot in the rotation until everybody comes back. So half a season at best. And then anything you get past that is gravy from Paxton. So some of the projections have him at like 120 innings. I don't think so. I'm not taking that. I'm leaning more towards 100 there at like a 4.5 ERA. And then Emmitt Sheehan's one of the other guys I mentioned. And he's kind of the most interesting arm of this bunch for me. He struggled against lefties a lot of the year, but then later in the year, he clearly made some adjustment because his K rate versus lefties spiked from, I think, 20% in August to like 37.2% in September, which is crazy. He made some tweaks to his gyro slider. And he also had some spikes in his spin rate in his slider around that same time. So obviously he was messing with that pitch a little bit, and whatever he did worked. He also has the most favorable projections kind of among those like depth arms for the Dodgers, and had a 182 expected batting average last year, which was top 2% in the majors. And that was a really surprising stat for me. And Fangraphs has him at about 100 innings pitched, around a ERA around 4.3. I would maybe take a little bit more conservative than that just because he's young, but I think he could easily outperform that. So all that information, taking all that into account, we've got Yamamoto, conservatively, all of these are conservative. We've got him conservatively at 175 innings, round of 3.3. Glasnow, 135 innings, round of 3.5. Buehler, 145 innings, around a 4 ERA. Miller, 145 innings, around a 4. Paxton, 100 innings, around a 4.5. Sheehan, around 100 innings, very conservatively at a 4.5. When you add all those up, and you create a bit of a weighted average between those, you end up with about 800 innings and a 3.83 ERA, which last year would have been tied for the 4th best among starting pitchers with the Mariners. That's why I've decided to wear their hat today, actually. And all of those numbers, I think every single one of those guys can beat. Those are all very, very attainable numbers for them. And so this is a massive upgrade, just looking at the most conservative of projections here. Like I said, injuries are going to happen, but they have so much depth to fill it in. And I think it balances out because, like I said, this 2024 rotation has so much upside that at least a couple of these guys are going to beat those projections that I just talked about. Obviously, it comes with a ton of risk, a ton of uncertainty, and there's a lot of workload issues. But what the Dodgers have done here is they've hedged all of that risk by just accruing a stable of these guys that are really good.
More risk.
It's more risk, but you have more options, and that's what they need. Really, Dave Roberts has got his work cut out for him because he's going to have to manage all that, dude. Unless anything crazy, apocalyptic, or extraordinary happens, like they're going to go into the playoffs with the 3 or 4 really good starters that they need to win a series.
Dude, you said so many numbers in there that like, did you see the Zach Galifianakis when he's calculating all the numbers in his head on the what movie was that when he was calculating all the numbers in his head?
Hangover, probably.
About, right? That's what I was trying to.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he was counting the cards or whatever. He was counting the cards or whatever. I don't remember, but that's what I was doing while you were doing all that. I was like, okay, 4.93 ERA, 103. And like, I was trying to get it all down, but that was like the most detailed, Dodgers pitching breakdown I've ever heard in my entire life. So I'm going to follow that up by not being nearly as detailed and by being way more emotional. But listen, like I mentioned in the read and like you mentioned, Taylor, I mean, the amount of talent is like ridiculous. I mean, Buehler, a perennial Cy Young candidate before the injury. Kershaw is one of the greatest of all time. And even though he's old and he doesn't pitch as many innings anymore, and last year his FIP was actually the highest of his career since his rookie year, the last 2 seasons he's pitched to an under 2.5 ERA at the ages of 34 and 35. The guy is absolutely ridiculous. Glasnow, like you said, number 1 guy, rotation type stuff, number 1 rotation stuff type guy is what I should have said. Yamamoto, obviously one of the most dominant Japanese pitchers ever, 3 straight MVPs, Japanese Triple Crowns and Cy Youngs. They don't even have Shohei Ohtani yet, and he's been one of the league's best pitcher for the last 3 years, and he throws 102 miles an hour. James Paxton has been dominant in years before where he's looked like a Cy Young candidate. Bobby Miller, a top prospect, showed a ton of flashes last year and had a damn good rookie season last year with a 1.16 ERA plus. Dustin May, he's an absolute stud when he pitches. He was dealing last year, 2.63 ERA, 9.93 whip, and 9 starts. He was a top prospect. He's got a 100-mile-an-hour sinker. Emmitt Sheehan, he was the first player ever, not just as a rookie, the first player ever to have back-to-back starts of 4+ innings, allowing no hits. Okay, he had 6 innings, no hits in one start. Then his next start, he had 4 2/3 innings with no hits. Okay, Tony Gonsolin, he's not going to pitch next year. He was bad last year, but the year before he was 16-1 with a 2.14 ERA. So I just named you 2 whole rotations of guys that you'd either be cool with in your starting rotation, and 5 of them could be your ace of your rotation. Okay, so the problem is that 5 of them are going to be on the IL to start the year. Okay, so you literally have an IL starting rotation by themselves. So they're going to rely on those other guys that we talked about. But I'm going to differ from you here a little bit, Taylor. All of those guys are either completely unknown commodities or risky and still relatively unknown commodities. Now, you said Yamamoto, Glasnow, 1A, 1B. I think Yamamoto is a clear number 1. I think Yamamoto is going to be the number 1 in that rotation. He appears to be an ace by all accounts. Like you said, Pitching Ninja did a great breakdown of his pitch mix. You see the highlights. You see everything with Yamamoto. But again, it's yet to be seen. If you're a Dodgers fan with Yamamoto right now, it's really just hope and belief because we have no proof that he'll be great in the big leagues. Now, I don't think he'll be bad by any stretch of the imagination. I still think he's going to be a good pitcher, but it's 100% unknown. How is he going to react, like you said, Taylor, to all that pressure of being the ace on a championship team, getting paid $300 million before you even throw a pitch in the MLB? Like, that is a lot of pressure to put on a 25-year-old kid. Glasnow is elite. We know what he is when he's on the mound. He is a dominant ace when he's on the mound. And like you said, last year, the guy threw his most innings of his career, which sounds encouraging until you hear, like Taylor said, it was 120 innings, and this is going to be his 9th year in the MLB, and he's your number 2. Again, I say he's your number 2 because, like I said, last year was his first year as a starter where he actually threw over 90 innings. He actually threw 112 in 2018, but half of those were out of Pittsburgh's bullpen. Nice job, Pittsburgh. So I would have Yamamoto as the 1. I would have Glasnow as the 2, and then I think Miller's the number 3 because, like you mentioned, Taylor, he was really good as a rookie, but again, he's only got 120 innings of big league experience right now. I'm concerned about him being my number 3 right now if I'm the Dodgers and my expectation is to win the World Series right away. And then to me, I think Paxton's the number 4, and he's thrown 118 innings since I graduated college. That's 2019 for the folks who do not know the timeline of my schooling, okay? And Emmitt Sheehan is the number 5, who has also thrown just 60 big league innings with an 89 ERA plus. So again, I just mentioned 2 rotations worth of guys, all of them with tons of talent. 0 of those guys are no doubt locks to be studs. And I think that's at least a little bit concerning if you're the Dodgers, especially if you have such a highly touted rotation. But again, I think that was part of their strategy. Like I said, get a bunch of highly talented guys who, even if they are hurt and underperform, there's got to be 3 or 4 guys where talent just wins out and they're healthy at the right time. And you come playoff, you get playoff time and you got Yamamoto, Glasnow, Buehler, and Kershaw in your rotation. You're like, well, this looks pretty good, So, and I mean, the bullpen, again, Taylor, I don't know if you want to talk about the bullpen or not, but I think the bullpen is kind of a lot of the same as well.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you have guys like Blake Trinan and JP Fireeisen, like they're also coming off of injuries. Like they've proven that they're capable relievers, obviously, but they're going to need those guys that can be the bulk relievers, that can be the followers, that can be the bridge between, the starter who's probably only throwing 5 innings. Because really look at any of those guys right now, except for maybe Yamamoto, like they're not going to want to throw them more than 5 innings most games, especially in the first half of the year. That's why I think Ryan Yarbrough, could end up being, he's very not important. The most talented arm in that bullpen. He is elite at limiting hard contact, and he can throw innings, and he could end up being one of the most valuable pieces they have just to get them from like the 5th through the 7th innings and get that bullpen over to Gratterall and Evan Phillips. So those depth arms that don't make the rotation, I think it's going to behoove the Dodgers to keep at least one of those guys in the bullpen for the exact same reason. Like they're going to need those guys that can go a few innings because that's going to be critical for them.
Well, and Taylor, we're going to talk about it here coming up next with their lineup, but I mean, you don't have to have guys who are throwing at a 2.1 ERA to sustain for this team. Like if Yarbrough comes in and throws 4 innings and gives up 2 runs, like the Dodgers are like, okay, we can get 2 runs with Freeman and Ohtani. Like we're good, Yeah. So